Well, hello, everyone. It's John Lockland here. I'm the director of Forum for Democracy International. Lovely to welcome you to this week's forum, where we're joined by Afonso Gonçalves from Lisbon, the leader of the Reconquista Party in Portugal, and by Freek Jansen from Amsterdam, a member of the board of Forum for Democracy and former member of the Dutch Parliament. I'm speaking to you this week from sunny St. Petersburg. And we're discussing the Remigration Summit, which, Afonso, you helped to organize last Saturday. And from what I can gather, it was something of a success. Tell us about it.
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you, John. Thank you to the FVD and the FVD International. Also, it's a pleasure to be here with you and Frederick. Just a small note, we are a political movement, not a party. But this was a great event. It was organized by me, Andrea Vallarati, Martin Sellner, Dries van Langenhoven from Flanders. And it was a great event. We had 300 people in the venue with all the chaos, with all the complexities, with all the changes in the last minute. We still managed to have 300 people there. And it was a great event. All the feedback was very positive. We managed to have, in my opinion, a great mix of identitarian points of view with more, let's say, conservative points of view. So this was a great event. It's been widely covered. There was a lot of media attention, and we managed to get our point across. And most importantly, freedom of speech and
Yes.
democracy and freedom won, and we won. Remigration had a big victory last Saturday.
Yeah, perhaps you could tell us something about the Antifa demonstrations and the other attempts to disrupt the event before we talk about the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, sure. There were major protests from our friends. Well, they're not really our friends, but they're common suspects who took very aggressively to the streets and who protested against really freedom of speech. These people are always telling us how they are standing up for democracy, freedom, liberty, when in fact they are the ones actively trying to censor different points of view. So this was a great victory for us, and they couldn't really stop it. There's nothing they could have done to stop it. They tried everything they could. They even created threats that they were going to create a siege around the venue in Gallerate. They managed to politically pressure the mayor, the left-wing mayor of Milan, into saying that the event couldn't go ahead in Milano. Thankfully, some Lega politicians and even some real influential politicians within Lega managed to create also this barrier and to find alternative solutions. So they didn't really succeed, and it was just another victory for the right wing and for real nationalists.
I didn't understand you exactly. Do you mean you had to change the venue, or do you mean that the attempt to you had to change the venue? Okay.
Yeah, we had to
because
change
I had.
Three times.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that I didn't understand. I had a similar experience in Brussels just over a year ago when at the National Conservatism Conference, the local mayor of one of the bourg in Brussels decided to close down the venue. In fact, to force it to change the venue and then indeed to close it down. What about the content? I mean, I'm sure everyone watching is familiar with the immigration issue. Lots of people have been saying there's too much immigration for a long time. It hasn't made much difference so far. Obviously, your summit was called Remigration, so the idea is to not just to have less immigration, but to actually to have emigration.
Exactly.
Did you? I mean, did your speakers talk about how to do this, or how to achieve this goal?
Yes, we did, and that's really you managed to sum it up perfectly. Immigration is out of control, and we can't just control it and try to reduce it. We really need to solve the root issue, and that's only possible with remigration. So this was really the main premise behind advocating for this policy. Now, remigration is, at least in, let's say, the more scientific definition, also put forward by Martin Sellner and others, it's a set of policies aimed at stopping this influx and this demographic replacement through different types of policies: social, cultural, economical, judicial, financial, etc. So it's not just deportations, it's not just deporting illegals, it's also creating the right incentives, the right pressures, the right rewards for people to voluntarily go back to their own nations. So it's really important that we start framing the immigration and the demographic reality not in terms of who can come in, who can we allow to come in, but who should go out, who should leave. That's how we should frame the immigration debate, not who can come in, but who should actually leave Europe so that Europe can survive.
I want to come to Freddie in a second, but what is the cause of immigration? Or to put it another way, is the cause or are the causes the same in all countries? I asked the question about the cause. It may seem a stupid question to ask, but the levels of immigration are now so high. I'm sure, I don't know if you had any speakers from Britain, but we all know that the immigration levels in Britain are running at over 1 million, well over 1 million a year, which is absolutely an absolutely gigantic figure. How do we understand these population movements?
Yeah, it's a really important question, and it's really complex to answer. There's various reasons. It's the ideological one, which is the most important. The ideological, the intellectual, and the spiritual that are lying beneath all the other reasons. That really we have to destroy these ideological roots of the globalist liberal system that is promoting this immigration. They want to create a world without borders, without rules, without laws, where, as we know, they want to create this new cosmopolitan liberal
Sure,
man.
but there must be economic factors as well when you're dealing with. I mean, it's an industry. The movement of this large number of people is an industry. We all know about the gangs and so on. People are making money out of it. But what is the economic driver?
Yes, they always advocate for economic reasons that are not really true when you analyze them. And there was actually a great presentation by Cyan Quinn from White Papers that analyzed the myths that are created to promote mass immigration. Yeah. And she destroyed each one of those, like immigration creates a high GDP, and she simply destroyed that myth by arguing that, in fact, not only a high GDP is not coincident with a higher level of economical life, also this GDP is only beneficial for the ones who are already financially well off, and it doesn't concern a real economic growth that impacts the lives of the everyday person, and it has a massive negative impact in housing, in social care, in security as well.
I'm delighted to welcome our co-host, Jeremy Nell. Jeremy, you have a question.
Sorry for arriving late.
That's fine.
I am in South Africa, and as you might know, there's a big discussion around South Africans, more specifically Afrikaners, immigrating or getting refugee status in the United States by Trump at the moment. So I guess this is also fairly close to my heart as I'm seeing what's unfolding here. What would be the metrics that determine or define an immigrant or an immigrant, shall we say? Is there a time period at which there's a cutoff, for example?
Sorry, what do you mean?
So he's asking, I think, how many generations you go back.
Oh. Yes. Because so for context, as you can see, I'm a white South African, and I am African by all accounts because of the number of generations that have been here. So what I'm asking is there a type of metric that one would use, or is it simply a case of they don't have a passport or a residency or something like that?
Well, I'll let go ahead, Freddie.
Yeah, I think this is different for different groups. I think, for example, the South African whites, they are settlers just as much as the Europeans were ever settlers in Europe. So I think we're speaking of the original population of areas. But then also within immigrant groups, you have differences. You have the recent waves, for example, from the Middle East through all the wars. You have the earlier waves in terms of earlier migration in the 70s, 80s. I think culturally those groups are different. The countries of origins are different. So I think we have to treat them as well as different groups with regards to immigration.
You're being quite diplomatic, Freddie. I mean, we all know that there is no problem with Chinese immigrants, for example,
Yes,
or at least much less.
Well, no, but there are, of course, it's not just Muslims, if that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think there are other groups as well that are problematic, possibly.
Yeah.
And I think the focus in immigration, and I said a few words about that as well, I think the focus for the last 20 years, 20, 30 years has been on Islam as a core problem. But I think the problem with immigration has nothing to do with a religion, but more with specific groups that are...
Yes. No, I didn't actually mean Muslims, because although I think Arab immigrants and Muslims obviously there are problems associated with them, but there are very much other categories.
let me jump in. I don't want to come across as if I'm opposed to it. I'm very much in favor of preserving and conserving culture in certain areas. And as an outsider looking on to Europe, I can see that what we have here is what Europe could become in the next 20 years, and it's a warning message that unless policy tightens, there's going to be mayhem in Europe, because we are a failed example of exactly that. We are a failed project, 100% failed. So what I'm getting at is like, if you think about Brexit, it was very, very wishy-washy. It wasn't a hard decision. It was very politicized. The EU policy of immigration seems equally wishy-washy. Nobody wants to say the wrong thing to get onto the wrong side of the wrong person, for example. But it very clearly is weak frameworks that are in place. And unless I have it misunderstood.
I suppose you're right. Yeah.
What do you mean exactly, Jerm? Go ahead. I'm not quite sure we follow you.
So China has no immigration issue, no mass immigration issue, because it's got tight border policy. Japan also, for example. And so they're maintaining a type of homogenous society to a large degree. Europe is clearly not that. And so on the one hand, I can see that there's a strong Muslim influence, right? That's entering Europe, but that's not the fault of Muslims. It's the fault of policy. Am I correct?
Well, I think it's definitely, as Afonso said a moment ago, it's of course encouraged. There's no doubt about it. Although I still don't fully understand. Of course, I'm familiar with the arguments which I disagree with, the ones that say we need immigration to pay for the pensions and so on. What I don't understand fully, and I suspect the answer varies from country to country, is why there are such levels, because the immigrants who come typically spend a lot of money through bribes and so on, because of course they come illegally and therefore have to pay large sums to get into the respective countries. And I suspect that the answers to that question, why these people come, what economic reason drives them to come, is probably different from country to country. I mean, maybe they come to live off benefits in France and to work in England or whatever. But anyway, your question, Jerm, is entirely right, because of course there's laxity. That's absolutely certain. But we're, in a sense, we're beyond that, because this is a remigration summit. It's not an anti-immigration. Yeah, of course, everyone's anti-immigration, but they want to achieve something more than just stopping at the arrivals. They want to reverse the trend. And that's what seems to me, however, I'm sure plenty of people find the idea shocking and so on. Of course, the Antifa do, and the left and everything. But how does one achieve it? Afonso, you said you reduce the incentives. Okay, that will presumably stop people coming. But how do you, what groups do you want to leave, and how can you encourage them to leave?
That's a very interesting question that we do need to answer. And coming back to what Frederick said before, this does change from country to country, because different countries have had different immigration policies, although not very different when you consider the European Union. We define remigration in 3 phases, and each phase has a target group. So group A, which would be the short-term phase, includes the illegal immigrants and the criminal immigrants, and also the fake asylum seekers and the fake refugees. So that would be Group A, and this is in the short term. They should be involuntarily, so it's not on their will, involuntarily deported. Then Group B is the legal immigrants who are legally in a given country, and they may even be working and paying taxes, but they are a cultural or a social or an economical burden. There have been various studies conducted in different countries that have identified that even second and third generation immigrants are still not only a cultural but also a financial burden. There are certain areas of origin, like Africa and certain areas of Asia, from which the immigrants who come from there, they are really a net negative economically. These studies are being proven in the Netherlands, in Denmark, etc. So these would be voluntarily deported through measures of incentives and pressures, like Sweden is doing now, creating these NGOs to help remigration, creating remigration centers to inform the immigrants on how they can come back to their countries, paying them a fee so they can come back easier to their host countries, so to their origin countries. So that would be Group B, and these would be in the medium term, in 5, 6, 7 years, at least in our model that we propose. And then there's Group C, which is more for the longer term. And these are the legal immigrants who are already naturalized. So who already have a citizenship card saying they are Portuguese or Dutch, which they're not, but they have a legal status saying that they are. These, we would have to identify if they are not assimilated. So there's that criteria that needs to be met. Maybe a small minority of immigrants from different continents will be assimilated. And we do not propose pragmatically the remigration of those immigrants. But if they are not assimilated, according to different criteria, cultural, social, if they're creating parallel societies, if they hold very different beliefs to the beliefs we hold, they should also be considered for immigration. This would be a harder process, but again, it comes back to those incentives. If the incentives are right, just like they came here because the incentives are right, they will also remigrate and come back to their origin country if the incentives are again put in place for them to prefer to come back to their origin countries than to stay here.
What do you think about that, Freddie? And what did you speak about? Because you were one of the speakers.
Yes, I agree. I think if so your first question was why do people leave their own countries and come to Europe in such mass numbers? And I think the main reason is economics.
Yes.
These third world countries, especially decades ago, weren't very appealing places to live. So they were promised a better life by all sorts of institutions, but also through hearsay. I met a guy, a Palestinian in the Middle East, and he said, yeah, my cousin moved to the Netherlands because I told him I was from the Netherlands. Yeah, I moved to the Netherlands. You get a free house there, and they help you get a job, and which is sort of true. So and this is known, of course, that these leaflets are handed out throughout Africa, whatever. There are campaigns actively promoting the immigration to Europe. So I think, and there was also recently this video for this guy in Calais. Did you see this? There was a British reporter in France asking, why do you want to move to the UK? He said, give me a house. And he said, yeah, but there are no houses. Give me a house. And it was a very funny video. I don't know if you've seen it, but I think these are anecdotes, of course, but there are studies also proving this, that there are these views throughout the world that Europe is a place of plenty, and it's all free, and you can all get it if you just go there. And if that's no longer the case, then they'll not want to come, but they may also want to leave if the alternative is a better one. So if they get maybe some money to help them relocate back to their own countries, where they can start a new life, a better life, one in which they fit into their own cultures, where they feel more at home. And if they have an economic position that they will want to start over from, maybe they'll want to leave. So I think there's these pressures on the one hand for reducing the attraction of being here, and otherwise increasing wanting to go to another place.
But
what was your yeah? Sorry, go ahead, Jan.
Yeah. Okay. So speaking from an African country, there's definitely some weird disconnect, not with what you're saying, but with what's happening politically. So, for example, when I went to Europe in 2023, when I met up with John and the rest of the team there, the amount of paperwork I had to go through just to get into Europe was on a level I've not experienced before. Okay. Now, compare that to the videos and photographs of the masses of other Africans who don't look like me on rubber dinghies entering Europe without any paperwork.
I told you 2 years ago you should have gone to Libya and just come by boat.
So without seeming like I'm suggesting something nefarious, I am suggesting perhaps that there is a weird type of politicization going on, which makes it very interesting that I have to go through so much effort to enter Europe, and they are very strict. You know, I'll get into a lot of trouble.
There's definitely. Sorry, go ahead, Freddie.
Is South Africa officially marked as an unsafe country in the Netherlands? I don't think so.
I don't know, but we probably are.
I think one of the mechanisms in play here is that we have a list of unsafe countries. And if you're from one of those countries, you can just, and if you're then deemed to be part of a minority group that is endangered, so you wouldn't be part of that, then you can come.
Although he is.
Yeah, although
but I mean, Libya versus South Africa as an endangered. Anyway.
Yeah, but still, so there we have these lists. This is how this on a policy level works. And then you can easily come. And what John said is also true. You can just get on a boat and just go.
No, but I think let's not beat about the bush. Of course, there's an ideology. Of course, there's a reason. There is, as Afonso said right at the beginning, there is a desire to promote multicultural, racially mixed societies. Of course, that's the program, and that's why a white South African is less welcome than a black African or a North African.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any. Well, I mean, I personally would be surprised if anyone seriously doubted that. Multiculturalism has been the dominant ideology for decades, for more than a generation, and of course, it goes with multiracialism. It goes with racial mixity. But what did you talk about, Freddie, and what were the other speakers like?
I think everyone gave excellent speeches. I think the tone was spot on. It was very good. It wasn't angry. It wasn't sort of crazy radical. It was all very nice and polite and very to the point. But I talked about the necessity for stopping the wars in the Middle East, because I think for a large part, the most recent waves of migration have been because those countries have been destroyed, and people wanted to leave, and now they don't want to go back because there's nothing to go back to. So I think it's very important in our movement to recognize the role of our countries in recent history, but also to advocate for peace, because when these countries, if you look at Qatar, if you look at the United Arab Emirates, if you look at Saudi Arabia, these are countries that have not been destroyed, and these are prosperous countries. These are places that even Westerners want to live. So this is a very strong incentive. If there is economic prosperity in the Middle East, that these people will want to go live somewhere where what I said in the beginning, where they'll feel more at home culturally, but also economically. So I think it's very important to also advocate for that.
Although it's funny you should mention that, because I'm not sure about Saudi Arabia, but as you know, the Emirates have a very, very high immigration population, but they keep them very much, as it were, sidelined, don't they? They keep them as Gastarbeiter and so on, without any pretense at integrating them into society. And that's the big difference, I think, with Europe, where Afonso, you yourself mentioned assimilation. Maybe assimilation isn't desirable. maybe that was itself. I mean, of course, one understands why it was promoted, but anyway, sorry, that's just a digression. But that's good. Yeah, that's a very good subject. And what about the other speakers?
What I think the presentation that Afonso mentioned earlier I felt that one was the most interesting to me because it was very concrete. I like the numbers. And of course, we know, in a general sense, we know about the effects of immigration. We know about the history of immigration, the cost of immigration. But she had a presentation also detailing specific savings that we could have if we didn't have immigrant populations. And she looked at the United States and the UK. And it inspired me to do the same for the Netherlands, because I think we can make a very similar calculation. And so that I think, Afonso, I don't know if you remember the exact numbers, but I think the UK could save, or the US could save
Billions.
900.
I don't remember the exact number, but they were in the billions, large billions.
Yeah, it was 900 billion per year they could save. And she said, so if you send back people, it will cost you money, because for example, if you give them money to move, if you give them money to leave, even large sums of money, but this is easily justifiable for the cost that you're saving every year. So it's even just an economic, net economic benefit.
But that sounds really. I see what you mean now, Freddie, when you said the tone was not angry, but instead very measured, because that you've just given us two arguments, one foreign policy argument and one economic argument, which, as far as I can tell, completely draws the sting from all the, obviously, the racism connotations and so on. And I would have thought the economic argument surely must be very convincing. Sounds like it's convincing.
Yeah, but it's not really. It's not really convincing if you talk about the argument of our ideological enemies.
Yeah.
And we can also, Cyan Quinn gave these two examples where, for example, Japan, their GDP has increased heavily over the last decades, one of the highest increases per year, and they have one of the lowest immigrant numbers in the world. So their population is 98% Japanese, yet their GDP keeps on increasing every year. And we also must consider that, and this is a very basic point of view, but our enemies are so deluded in their worldview that they don't even see it. Where would you rather live? Would you rather live in India, where the GDP is very high because there's millions and millions or billions of people working, or would you rather live in Luxembourg, where the GDP is much lower, but the GDP per capita, because it's qualified labor and intelligent working people, the GDP may be lower, but the GDP per capita is much higher. So actually, immigration from the third world is not only not productive to the economy, it's actually a detriment to the economy, because it keeps our economy at these low skilled labor level. What we should in fact focus on is intra-European immigration for Europeans. We have this with the Schengen space, where we could have highly qualified immigrants that actually produce a net positive for the economy, like we have a lot of German doctors in the south of Portugal. Just last week, the president of Chega was ill, and he was taken care of by a German doctor. We also have Portuguese nurses, for example, in the UK, and this is a net positive for the economy. But to import thousands, hundreds of thousands of people to pick cherry in these villages, this is
Exactly.
not at all positive.
But that is another, I think, yet another economic argument, and you see this very clearly in Britain, which of course has had, as far as I can tell, the highest levels of immigration across Europe, proportionally and probably in absolute terms. Well, to put it very simply, as the Americans say, if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. And Britain has the lowest productivity almost of any European economy, because it's drugged itself for decades now on low, as you say, low skill, low productivity, cheap labor, and which, by the way, itself, you mentioned cherry picking, but one of the things that grew in the last 20 years in Britain is the growth of fruit farms. These were in fact a consequence, these fruit farms, of immigration, because suddenly you had all these people who arrived from God knows where, and but basically the only economic activity they could do was to pick raspberries, and that in itself generated industries which otherwise wouldn't have existed. But it's not by having a lot of fruit farms that you grow to be a very developed economy. The Japanese case you mentioned, the Japanese thing is particularly interesting because, if I'm not mistaken, the Japanese economy, the Japanese population is in fact declining because of a very low birth rate. And yet you say, Afonso, that the GDP is going up. And that's pretty impressive if your GDP is going up while your population is going down. What about demographics and natalism? Did anybody talk about that? Because that's the other side of the problem. Low birth rates in Europe.
Yeah, no one covered specifically natalism. It's a very important issue. I agree with it, and we should really talk about it. Maybe it's for the next edition of ReSum 26. But it's a very important topic indeed. However, there's this argument that's being defended by our ideological enemies that we need to import hundreds of thousands of immigrants because our families are not having kids. When in fact, not only are these low birth rates cyclical and historical, and they have happened in different periods of history, also our governments would rather invest hundreds of millions and more into facilitating immigration, facilitating the lives of immigrants, creating all of these processes for immigrants to have easier lives, free housing, free healthcare, subsidies for their kids, when in fact all of this money could be used to actually solve the root cause of the problem by helping our families to have more kids. So it's really a misdirection and a lack of political will to put our families first, our people first, and that is causing the problem. And then we're fixing it. We're not really solving anything by creating more problems by importing these people that wouldn't have needed to be imported in the first place if we put this money and these resources into helping our families to have more kids.
Are there any timelines?
Timelines in terms of remigration or in terms of natalism? What do you mean?
Both.
Well, in terms of remigration, our model has three phases, as I said before: short term, medium term, and long term. For the short term, this would have to be immediate. So as soon as there is a real right-wing nationalist government in different countries, they should focus on these policies immediately. Then the group B would be medium term, 5 years, 6 years. Group C, this would need to be over decades, 2-3 decades, in order to also undo all of the anti-white, anti-European propaganda and institutions and organizations that fuel then this societal injustice that is being perpetrated on our people.
How connected to EU policy is it? Is it possible to try and dismantle the bigger structure as part of the long-term ambition?
To destroy the European Union legislation on immigration?
Yeah.
There's a lot of treaties that we need to simply get rid of, and we shouldn't really accept that they're being forced on us. We need to put pressure on a European level. There was European elections last year, but we really need to go further, putting pressure on these treaties. But as Dries spoke about, Dries van Langenhove in his speech, we have the judicial framework to implement remigration now. It's simply and purely a lack of political will. There's no political will to do it. And we need to make sure that these right-wing parties and right-wing governments, they have, at least those have this political will. For example, it's not the whole solution, but Giorgia Meloni is implementing this agreement with Albania to deport immigrants into a third country that is considered safe into these centers of deportation in Albania. So that's a positive step in the right direction, but we need to go much further. But it's simply and purely a lack of political will from our leaders.
Freddie, what about the Netherlands? The Netherlands unexpectedly elected one of Europe's most famous anti-immigrant politicians to office last year or in 2023. Doesn't seem to have made a lot of difference, does it?
No. So we have we had another 300,000 people coming in last year when he was in government. It's not going very well. I disagree about the European Union. I don't think you can do this within the European Union. It's absolutely impossible within the European framework to limit the freedom of people, the freedom of movement of people. it is the absolute foundation of the European Union that this has to be able to happen. So even if you remigrate people from European countries, they are allowed back in. So we have to close.
Well, hang on. The free movement is between citizens of the European Union.
Yeah, but if they get a status, in one country, they can come in another way. So if we send them back, if we send people from the Netherlands, and then they get on a boat back to Greece, and they can just walk back in, and we have nothing we can do about that. So we have to leave the European Union before we can ever do anything about immigration.
And also the Schengen Agreement, the abolition of physical borders, in addition, of course, to the principle of free movement, but the abolition of borders has, without any doubt, been a major factor for the very simple reason that you can land in Lampedusa and go to Cologne or Stockholm or whatever without obviously showing your passport. And that has had a massive attractive effect. But I agree with you, you have to go beyond even just the Schengen Agreement.
What is the general sentiment on the ground? Do people in general love the idea of immigration, and is it, or not? I mean, because this is just a handful of us talking.
Well, I think, at least in the Netherlands, but I think this goes for the whole of Europe. I think immigration has never been popular. It's always been unpopular, and it's people have always voted for parties they thought would do something about it, which ended up doing nothing about it. I think that's been our history for the past decades. And it's always vague excuses. We can't do anything. It's a sort of force of just a sort of natural law that this goes on and on and on. Which is why we've always strongly advocated for a referendum, something which they abolished in the Netherlands, because then people can have a direct vote. Do we want this or not? Because the parties are never going to do this.
Yeah, in Portugal, it's very similar. In Portugal, there have been very recent studies saying that 70%, almost 67% of the population are against this level of immigration. They are totally against it, not just a little bit, they are totally against this number of immigrants in Portugal. Yet, just a week after this study came out, that was very conclusive, the government is establishing new partnerships with the Portuguese-speaking countries, the so-called Portuguese-speaking countries community like Cape Verde, Brazil, Angola, Mozambique, etc., to facilitate the immigration from these countries. So it's the government actively going against the expressed will of the people. And as Frederick said, people have voted, not only, they haven't voted for this, they've actively voted against it. Yet the opposite keeps on being implemented. It's really a shame, because this same system, this liberal order that legitimizes itself as representing a supposed will of the people, when the people want something that the regime doesn't want, the regime does what it wants and not what the people desire and what the people wish. So it's really a shame and really discredits the whole liberal democratic system here in the West.
Frederick, you said earlier that this is impossible within the EU framework. How easy or difficult is it for a country to exit the EU?
It's actually relatively easy. You just invoke Article 50, like the UK did. Which is actually why in the Netherlands there are parties like the Liberal Democrats who want to put the membership of the European Union into the Dutch constitution, so we can never leave anymore. But right now it's not the case, and for any country it's as simple as just sending a letter to Brussels saying bye-bye, and then it's over. And then you have this disentanglement period, and then it's finalized.
But why isn't that happening?
Well, the sentiment has changed a little bit, I suppose, because before COVID, the European Union was getting less and less popular. We'd just had a referendum in the Netherlands about the association agreement with the Ukraine and the EU, in which I think 65% of the Dutch population voted against this association agreement, which was basically a referendum on the European Union. Of course, a year before there was the Brexit referendum. There was this sort of vibe in Europe about people not being happy with the EU, people wanting to leave. AFD, of course, was always in favor of leaving European Union. There are many, the PVV in the Netherlands as well. I think in the south it might be different, but the north of Europe has been very, very critical of the European Union. And I think, and then in COVID, this all sort of changed a little bit. People are now slightly more. If you look at the polling, they're more in favor of the European Union again. But I think this is going to change again. So I think it's been a short peak in interest, but this is going back down.
I think the broader question is also the whole issue of national feeling, which is so catastrophically weakened across the whole of Europe, with one or two very small exceptions. Of course, the main one obviously being Hungary, and to some extent Poland, although the National Conservatives have lost power there. I'm speaking to you from Russia, and there was a speech at the forum that I'm attending, the International Legal Forum in St. Petersburg yesterday, by the head of the Constitutional Court. And this is a lawyer, this man is a lawyer who is also something of a sort of moral authority in Russia. And he was speaking about corruption, and he went on and on about corruption and how terrible it was and how it had to be rooted out and all the rest of it. But what I was struck by in that speech, it's a bit difficult to communicate, but it was a completely holistic approach. Here you have this chief lawyer talking about a specific criminal problem, but the approach was completely holistic, and of course it included references to national pride and spiritual values and so on. And it was Mike Bentz, in his work on propaganda and control of social networks, talks about the whole of society approach, which the opponents of free speech and the proponents of censorship use. And that phrase is appropriate, I think, also for this regenerative national feeling, this regenerative approach, which you see in some countries, this whole of society, where everything comes together. So obviously economics, but also religion, national pride, and so on. And that generates a sort of corpus of feeling, which would no doubt also, if it were to happen in Europe, help the immigration issue. But it's exactly that which I think is so lacking. And that's why, unfortunately, I mean, I'd love to believe that there's a great groundswell of opinion against the European Union. But there's also, I'm afraid, a very large element, I think, of, I mean, certainly in France where I live, of lassitude, of people being basically ground down, and also being affected by decades of constant propaganda saying that the European Union protects them, and that if they didn't have it, then they wouldn't have all kinds of protections launched into the unknown and all the rest of it. So I'm afraid there's a very great passivity.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I can give you the example of Portugal. We have, of course, our historic past. Yet nowadays we have a very following population that doesn't really question any of the principles of the status quo. I can give you three quick examples: COVID, Ukraine, and the European Union. On these three issues consecutively, the Portuguese are the ones who took the vaccine for COVID the most in Europe. They are also the ones who have a higher rate of support for Ukraine. They're also the ones, we are also the ones who have a higher acceptance rate of the European Union. So in all of these trends and issues, you see a very clear pattern of we looking to the authority of the social media, TV, entertainment world and mediatic world, looking for this leadership and looking to always follow the trends of what's socially acceptable or politically acceptable. This, in my analysis, in my opinion, stems from our 36 or 38 years old, actually more, 46 years old, proto-fascist, let's say, dictatorship that had a lot of very positive, conservative, nationalist aspects to it, but also our leader, our Prime Minister Salazar, who ruled for 36 years, he had this idea very ingrained in his thinking, also a Catholic thinking, of not politicizing the people, of making people very following of the state, not politicized, not critical, no critical thinking at all. And this is also this apathy nowadays in our population, I believe, stems from that negative aspect of our regime, which was very positive in a lot of ways. So that's my analysis, and it's really not good to see that. I will also give you a short other example that our population is very heavily against immigration. They are very heavily at the root identitarian and nationalistic, yet they vote because they have a lack of political literacy. They vote for the socialists or the social democrats who are totally pro-immigration because they vote for the economical project of these parties. They don't know that attached to this economic project is a social project, both for the family, for the sexual values, family values, and also for immigration. Attached to this social project, to this economical project for which they vote and that they like, this father figure of the state ruling and helping people, they don't know that attached to this economical project, there's a social project that they actually despised. So I would say these two reasons, the apathy, historical apathy stemming from our last regime that depoliticized people, and also a second reason would be this lack of political literacy.
Do you think that if nothing really comes from above, because a lot of the conversation sort of hinges on the political will of the leadership, but if that doesn't really happen, then doesn't it become a grassroots issue?
I mean, that's an interesting point of view. Frederick, I will let you answer that.
Oh, no, I just wonder what you're imagining, just people getting trucks and moving people themselves.
Well, I don't know the answer. That's why I'm asking. But I'm wondering if, do you think you fight propaganda with propaganda? A lot of what's happened now is a result of decades of people being propagandized into perhaps a certain way of thinking. And I wonder if going back to that kind of strategy in many ways, like lots of podcasts, for example, because you're not really going to win over the mainstream networks very easily because it doesn't seem to be in that zeitgeist. So you kind of have to start at grassroots, one person at a time, chatting to people in coffee shops. It sounds really ridiculous, but I mean, is that the reality?
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that the opening up of X has really done wonders for this, because the media have functioned as a giant filter for information about the effects of immigration. So for decades on regular television, you would only see happy people cooking together, sharing recipes, whatever. But the real effects have been hidden from the public, as far as they're not seeing them themselves. So a lot of people are living in the countryside, not seeing much effects of the immigration, mass immigration, or not really dealing with it. But all these effects are happening. And now through X, I think a lot of things are getting visible because this algorithm has been broken open. For a while, this happened in the same way with Facebook, which closed down. So I think it's a matter of reach and visibility, and I think in that way, propaganda is not even necessary, because I think just seeing the real effects has an effect on people that opens their eyes to the reality of immigration.
But I also think, I'm sure Afonso, you'll confirm this, that the fact that you managed, in spite of everything, to hold the summit, the fact that Freddie, got interviewed at one point by a whole range of mainstream Italian and indeed international media. I saw Telegiornale 24, but I also saw Sky News on the microphones in front of you.
Those Brazilians
or whatever, yeah. But the fact, one of the great successes of this conference is that you have put the concept out there. And as we haven't mentioned it yet, but as we should all remind ourselves, when in November 2023, a fake story was circulated by the fake media about a meeting in Potsdam in Germany, which Martin Sellner addressed, where remigration was discussed. The very notion, and in particular the use of the word deportation, created a huge outcry in Germany and led to massive street demonstrations, or at least that's how they were presented, all across Germany. But you seem, on the face of it, I would say, both of you, Freddie and Alfonso, and the other organizers, to have begun to change the tide, in the sense that there it is, it's out there. What?
It's funny that you say that, because I was absolutely surprised by the amount of press that was in front of the venue. There's 20, 30 journalists, yes. I think 10 camera crews. It was incredible.
Yes.
And two things about it. One is that they all wanted the same thing. They were looking for a quote of someone saying that remigration means forced mass deportations. That's what they wanted to hear.
Yes.
But everyone was denying that and saying, no, it's about voluntary relocation. So they didn't like that. But two, also I had a conversation with a obviously communist guy with a nose ring or whatever. He was a journalist. And I posted a tiny clip of that because he started, "You look too elegant to be a little racist." I said, just nothing. And then he held the microphone, just expecting me to fill in with a typical trick. But in the end, I convinced him even slightly. And he ended saying, are you even sure that you're at the right conference? Because you seem too polite to be here. So I thought it was a little victory. And I think if we bring this in the right way, I think a lot of people can be convinced of our opinions.
I mean, my view, to answer your question, Germ, is that yes, and of course I agree with you, Freddie, that X, the liberation of X is extremely important, and no one should underestimate. And obviously, any campaign like this hopes to influence public opinion and convince people and all the rest of it. But I do personally also believe very strongly in political leadership, and I think people do follow. And you mentioned Salazar, Afonso, although you said that people followed him unpolitically. That's an interesting concept, but they followed him, and if he ruled the country for 36 years, it's because ultimately he was supported. And today you have Viktor Orban, who, whatever one thinks about him, has set the agenda in his own country, and people have followed it. In other words, I don't believe that grassroots can do anything. You have to have grassroots support. You have to have support, but it can't work unless there is political leadership. And unfortunately, I think we're rather a long way from finding that political leadership. I mean, we all know we've all got our own candidates, definitely, but so far they're not in power. Maybe that will come.
Yeah, maybe. Frederick just mentioned a very important point, which was that he was asked if he was not too polite to be in that conference, and this is exactly why our enemies fear us so much, why the media censors us so much, why the ideological enemies fear so much, why they wanted this conference not to go ahead, because they know that if we have a seat at the table, if we have a place to discuss policy in a public forum, if we have an open debate of ideas, they know that our ideas win, partially because people will understand and recognize that we are not lunatics, extremists with far out of sight political ideas. We're actually very reasonable, very moderate, very, let's say, normal, and very acceptable politically people. And this is why they want to censor so much and impede the organization of this summit so much, because they know that if people listen to our ideas, if they have an unfiltered vision of what we actually defend, people will actually, a lot of them, agree with us. And that's why they want to censor us.
But I don't think that being smart and being moderate helps. Look at for whatever anybody thinks of Trump. All right, yes, populism is what got America to vote for him overwhelmingly.
But it's also common sense, right? It's populism in the style, I agree. It's a very, let's say, outgoing approach, but it's common sense policies. It's nothing out of the ordinary. That's what I was getting at.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that perhaps what is required is a political. If we are looking at political leadership, there needs to be a new type of packaging that needs to come with fire and zest and lots of persuasive tricks, basically.
No, I agree.
That's what I mean by leadership. And
yes,
and Trump also, of course, does this thing, as we now have all seen through it, where he says something totally crazy and then rushes out of the room, and everyone's standing around thinking, what the hell was that all about? Placing maximum demands and then getting asking for 150% and then getting 100%. But John, you need both. But you need both,
yes.
and he obviously, not as we know, won the popular vote, and but you need both.
But I suspect, though, that European leaders are a little bit tentative. They're afraid because of certain leaders that have come out of Europe in the past few decades. That ended.
But that's why Alfonso's approach is one of the components. So the reasonable approach here are, economic arguments. It costs more, costs less, all that. That is part of the component, but it all needs to work together. And that's why I agree with you, Afonso. Trump, for all his showmanship, is actually trying to, as far as I can see anyway, to do common sense things.
But Trump will also not work in many European countries. I don't know about all of them, but Trump, as you say, he is a showman. He's an entertainer. He's very much out there. And I think if you would put him on a stage in the Netherlands, he would just walk out.
Yeah, exactly. Very good. Well, listen, it's been a delight talking to you both. Afonso Gonçalves, the head of the Reconquista movement, not a party. But the name is a whole program in itself, obviously.
Yeah,
and Freek Jansen, member of the Board of Forum for Democracy, former member of Parliament. Thank you both very much. And thanks to all our listeners for watching. All the best to everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.